At the site of the Fox Cottage at 1510 Hydesville Road, a monument was erected that said, "The birthplace of modern spiritualism." Upon this site stood the Hydesville Cottage, the home of the Fox sisters, through whose mediumship communication with the spirit world was established, March 31st, 1848. The monument went on to say, "There is no death, there are no dead." Placed here December 5th, 1927. A Masonic obelisk in Rochester, New York, further commemorates the event. But investigators continue to question exactly what the sisters encountered. The mysterious name given to their spirit, Mr. Splitfoot, is considered by some to be an old world reference to the adversary of mankind, the devil. In the wake of the Fox sisters' encounter, a man named Phineas Quimby opened an office dedicated to spiritually aided healing in 1859. Quimby is considered the father of the New Thought movement, believed to be the forerunner of what is today called the New Age. Quimby developed a process of healing through altered states of consciousness, achieved primarily through hypnosis. He believed that a person's illness was the result of their spiritual beliefs. Therefore, by getting rid of a person's old belief and introducing them to new thought, he could, supposedly, heal them. His followers write that, in treating his patients, Dr. Quimby allowed his mind for a while to be passive, and in this way he was affected by the troubled mind of his patient, and so could feel his aches and pains. Then, because his spiritual senses were freed from his own beliefs, they were acted upon and controlled by a higher intelligence. Through what he learned in his sessions, Dr. Quimby began to abandon his traditional beliefs in favor of what the higher intelligence revealed. The New Thought magazine reported that Dr. Quimby believed Jesus of Nazareth was the one person who taught this science. He said, "I have no doubt of his being the only true prophet who had ideas entirely superior to the world. Not that he as a man was any better, but he was the embodiment of a higher wisdom." One of Quimby's patients was Mary Baker Eddy, who would go on to form the Church of Christ Scientists in 1879, based in part upon Quimby's teachings. The young Mary Baker imagined Quimby to possess an understanding of God's law and was ready to proclaim him as the discoverer of the true nature of the healing done in Bible times. Though Eddy would break away from Quimby, she continued his practice of healing by correcting the so-called errors of traditional beliefs. She claimed that her teachings were based solely upon the Bible, but that the Bible was full of mistakes and she was the one to correct them. It is reported that Eddy believed the Bible contained 30,000 errors in the Old Testament and 300,000 in the New Testament. When she published her work, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, she claimed it was the final revelation of God to mankind and asserted that her work was inspired of God. The word key in the title of her book is in reference that she is the key to unlocking the Bible, which she called a dark book, and that her writings provided the key spoken of in Revelation 3:7. Therefore, as the key, Eddy sought to explain certain misunderstandings. For example, the Bible says, "Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick." Yet Eddy is criticized for teaching that prayer for the sick is not what will lead to one's healing. Only enlightened understanding heals. Eddy wrote specifically that the common custom of praying for the recovery of the sick finds help in blind belief, whereas help should come from the enlightened understanding. Among other problems were the issues of sin and death. Eddy taught that these things were only illusions and that a person must overcome them by realizing their unreality. Meanwhile, the Bible says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and that death passed upon all men, for all have sinned. Furthermore, the Scripture says that if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But Mary Baker Eddy taught that there is no sin, and the belief in sin, which has grown terrible in strength and influence, is an unconscious error. Concerning the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, she taught that the material blood of Jesus was no more efficacious to cleanse from sin when it was shed upon the accursed tree than when it was flowing in his veins as he went daily about his Father's business. Eddy next sought to deny death itself by redefining the resurrection of Christ with shadowy language that seems to foretell the New Age. She said, "The final demonstration of the truth which Jesus taught and for which he was crucified opened a new era for the world. The lonely precincts of the tomb gave Jesus a refuge from his foes, a place in which to solve the great problem of being. His 3 days' work in the sepulchre set the seal of eternity on time. He proved life to be deathless." Eddy's views concerning Jesus seem to echo the same conclusion wrought as a result of the Fox sisters' spiritual encounter, the idea that there is no death and there are no dead. Researcher Gary Hand sums up Eddy's views concerning Jesus, saying she taught that Jesus Christ was just a man who overcame death by realizing that it did not exist. Therefore, he did not rise from the dead because he never died. Jesus Christ was not the Son of God, did not come from God, but is only an idea from the infinite mind, i.e., the principle of God. Eddy said that Jesus demonstrated the power of Christian Science to heal mortal minds and bodies, but this power was lost sight of and must again be spiritually discerned. This desire to generate healing through spiritual means had great momentum in the 19th century. In 1848, supposedly the same day the Fox sisters communicated with the dead, a man named Andrew Jackson Davis wrote in his diary saying, "About daylight this morning, a warm breathing passed over my face, and I heard a voice, tender and strong, say, 'Brother, the good work has begun. Behold, a living demonstration is born.'" Like Phineas Quimby and later Edgar Cayce in the 20th century, Andrew Jackson Davis performed medical diagnosis and healing while in a mesmerized, trance-like state, making use of what he called the spirit eyes in his forehead. He would be known as the John the Baptist of modern spiritualism and the prophet of the New Revelation. In 1844, Davis claimed to be swept away from his home in Poughkeepsie, 40 miles away to the Catskill Mountains, where he encountered the long-dead spirits of the Greek philosopher Galen and the Swedish seer Emanuel Swedenborg. Galen gave Davis a magical staff of healing, while Swedenborg promised to instruct and guide him. Thereafter, Davis considered himself personally guided in his steps by the Swedish mystic. As a result, Andrew Jackson Davis's teachings were nearly identical to those of Swedenborg. Swedenborg, sometimes known as the man who talked with angels, was a spiritual medium who died in 1771, best known for his unbiblical concepts of heaven and hell. In his lifetime, he wrote many books on his experiences, though he said that the books were not written by himself. Rather, he claimed they were inspired by spirits and angels from the spirit world. These spirits repeatedly told Swedenborg of the errors of traditional church doctrine. As a result, he would argue against the idea of a triune God, and like Mary Baker Eddy, vehemently rejected the concept of Christian atonement and original sin. Swedenborg's rejection of Christ's atonement on the cross was so extreme that he wrote, "This I can affirm, that whenever the angels hear anyone say that God determined the damnation of the human race, and as an enemy was reconciled by his Son, they are affected in a manner similar to those who from an uneasiness in their bowels and stomach are excited to vomiting, on which occasion they say, 'What can be more insane than to affirm such things to God?'" According to his followers, Swedenborg's teachings declare that there is no such thing as eternal punishment, and that those who find themselves in hell after death can work their way towards something higher. Yet Swedenborg himself warned against the revelations of the very spirits he communed with. In his miscellaneous theological works he wrote, "Spirits narrate things. When spirits begin to speak to man, care should be taken not to believe them, for most everything they say is made up by them, and they lie. And if man listens and believes, they insist and in various ways deceive and seduce." Despite such contradiction, Swedenborg's influence has been great, impacting churches, and with them the ancient orders of Freemasonry. Many Masonic lodges throughout Europe became known as Swedenborgian lodges, and the rite of Swedenborg became part of Masonic ritual. Today, Emanuel Swedenborg is hailed as a hero among Spiritists and liberal Christians, who have even established Swedenborgian churches, such as the Church of the New Jerusalem, dedicated to his teachings. Perhaps most significant is Swedenborg's example of setting down spirit-communicated writings, something that would set a pattern repeated well into the 20th century and practiced by nearly every major leader of what would become the New Age movement. While Swedenborg channeled many spirits, years after his death, Andrew Jackson Davis would claim to channel him. Supposedly, whilst in a trance, Davis acted as the medium through whom Swedenborg was able to resume his work by dictating various philosophical books, in one of which, published in 1847, he predicted the advent of spiritualism. From 1845 to 1847, Davis delivered some 157 lectures while in a trance-like state in New York City on scientific, historical, and philosophical topics. Reportedly famed macabre author Edgar Allan Poe even attended some of Davis's seances. In what is considered his greatest work, The Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations and Voice to Mankind, Andrew Jackson Davis described a mystic view of the cosmos and of creation, promoting the theology of universalism. Some modern spiritists believe Davis's writings shadowed the evolutionary thinking that would soon be set down by Charles Darwin. Darwin's theory of evolution, perhaps the climax of a movement aimed at establishing new thought in the minds of men, would, for many, remove the fear of an almighty creator and widen the gate into the realm of the unknown. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, Western culture has been overwhelmed by a fascination with spirit communication and paranormal phenomenon. Some of the most influential people in the modern era have been influenced themselves by New Age spiritism and the occult. From Mary Todd Lincoln, the wife of Abraham Lincoln, who held seances in the White House to communicate with her son Willie, who had died at a young age, to Hillary Rodham Clinton, who supposedly contacted the ghost of Eleanor Roosevelt with New Age psychic Jean Dixon. Hillary is pictured here submitting herself to the power of an American Indian shaman. Inventors, heroes, dictators, world leaders, and even American presidents have been either influenced by or directly involved with the movement. Thomas Edison spent years trying to develop a machine that could communicate with spirits of the dead. While his efforts were unsuccessful, Edison was convinced that one day such an invention would be possible. Chester Carlson, the inventor of the now famous Xerox photocopying process, reportedly received the inspiration for his invention from the spirit world. Carl Gustav Jung, whose teachings on the subconscious mind have had a tremendous influence on modern psychology, claimed to be guided by a mysterious spirit named Philemon. Jung's contemporary Sigmund Freud said that it no longer seems possible to brush aside the study of so-called occult facts, the real existence of psychic forces in which, until now, we did not believe. Commenting on his own experiences with powers unknown, Dr. Andrea Puharich wrote, I am personally convinced that superior beings from other spaces and other times have initiated a renewed dialogue with humanity. While I do not doubt their existence, he said, I do not know what their goals are with respect to humankind. Some argue that the goals of these beings were partly witnessed during the Second World War. Adolf Hitler was greatly influenced by spiritual forces, an influence that seemed to shape his horrific Nazi movement. French intellectual Denis Diderot once described his experience at a Nazi rally in 1938. Diderot indicated that despite his rigorous attempt to remain detached from the spectacle unfolding before him, he was involuntarily drawn into the vortex of the crowd's hysterical adulation of Adolf Hitler. It was only by dint of a kind of superhuman resolve, said the French philosopher, that he was able to regain his equilibrium before the mesmerizing presence of Hitler's evil genius.
Bloß die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
Reportedly, Diderot said of Hitler that some people believe, from having experienced in his presence a feeling of horror and an impression of supernatural power, that he is the seat of thrones, dominions, and powers, by which St. Paul meant those hierarchical spirits which can descend into any ordinary mortal and occupy him like a garrison. What I am saying would be the cheapest form of romantic nonsense were it not that what has been established by this man, or rather through him, is a reality that is one of the wonders of the century. Hitler's training as a spiritual mystic came through a secret order known as the Tool Society, an occult organization. Though the cause of such societies may vary, the same occult principles can be found in the Brotherhood of the Masonic Orders, whose members have included some of the most powerful political leaders of the 20th century. To test this argument, consider Hitler's dream of the Superman alongside this quote from Masonic author W.L. Wilmshurst from his book, The Meaning of Masonry. He writes, "This, the evolution of man into Superman, was always the purpose of the ancient mysteries, the religion of Masonry. Man, who has sprung from the earth and developed through the lower kingdoms of nature, has yet to complete his evolution by becoming a God-like being." Wilmshurst provides a clue, revealing that while the modern Spiritist movement is often referred to as a new discovery, its origins date back centuries to the subterranean levels of the ancient world, to a time when spirit communication was considered commonplace among men, and was at the very heart of the ancient mystery religion. But with this ancient practice also comes ancient warnings found in the writings of the Old Testament. Author Dave Hunt comments on the book of Isaiah.
Isaiah 8:20. Why do you turn to spirits that peep and mutter, these wizards, the spirits of the dead? I mean, Aunt Jane wasn't too bright when she was alive, but now that she's on the other side, she seems to be a fountainhead of wisdom. That doesn't make too much sense. Where did she get this from, and how do you know you're even talking to Aunt Jane? Some of them claim, they've all got their spirit guides or whatever, and they don't know who these creatures are that are talking to them and through them. You go to a psychic, a medium, and for example, Bishop James Pike, California Episcopalian bishop, went to a medium. Well, his son had committed suicide, and he was in his son's apartment in London. And some things would move around. He'd come back from being out, and there's some postcards in a certain pattern, and with messages and so forth. And he began to think that his son, Jim Jr., was trying to communicate with him. So he went to Anna Twigg, a famous psychic there in London. And what do you know? She goes into a trance. And, the prophets in the Bible don't go into a trance. They don't get in an altered state and then something takes over. God speaks through them. Never do they do that. But anyway, she goes into a trance, and wow, it sounds like his son's voice, Jim Jr., speaking through her. And he says things that only he and his son would know. She couldn't possibly know. This has happened multiple times. So that convinces him it must really be his son. Yeah, but what does his son say? You see, we go by what, in part, in many ways of analyzing them, but in part we go by what do they say? Well, first thing his son Jim says,
some Christ, some priest, some preacher, some deity, some prophet is our Redeemer that excuses us from living life. We have missed the message. Why don't we learn to think on our own and find new benefactors for that greatness? Genius, you know, it is that which is not mediocrity, is not predictable, is not funded, is not hired. It is that which can dream beyond the paradigms. You have the ability to be a genius. And did you know that every dream that you dream should never be put aside as imagination? That every dream is the next step of your evolution. And Ramtha gives us permission. He first says, you are God. Now let's get about learning how to be that. Religion is no longer sacred. Everyone questions the church. They should. Everyone questions the meaning of life, and everyone questions the direction that science has taken. And when you do that, it is an age of enlightenment. We cannot have. Enlightenment does not come on the heels of the Black Plague. No, that is not enlightenment. Enlightenment comes on the heels of plenty. Because only when you are gluttonous to everything and you question everything are you ripe to know what you have never known. So forget about the past and live today on the wisdom, the virtue of what you've gained. You don't have to feel guilty about your life anymore. I would love someone to stand up and say, God doesn't live outside of you. God is you.
While J.Z. Knight is among the more successful mediums, she is certainly not alone. A nearly identical doctrine is preached from a series of channelers who believe they are in communication with extraterrestrial spirits from other planets and galaxies. In the documentary UFOs and Channeling, the late actor Telly Savalas reveals that the purpose of channeling these alien entities is entirely consistent with the purpose of the New Thought New Age movement, to change the thinking of mankind.
Tonight, we're going to show you some film that may change the way you think about life. Change the way you think about life.
Next, we are introduced to a woman who channels a spirit, calling itself Leah.
Hello, Philip. How are you today?
Very good, Leah. How are you?
Very fine, thank you. So, what is it that you wanted to know?
Where are you from?
I'm from Venus.
I don't think anybody's going to believe that you or anybody else could be from Venus. Could you explain to us how you could be when everybody knows it's uninhabitable?
They think it's uninhabitable because it is not inhabitable by physical life forms. We have bodies of light.
While Leah rambles on with fantastical ideas, she soon compels the audience toward global unity, a message found throughout the New Age movement.
And what occurs here on this planet will affect the rest of the universe. Can you, with all of your different ideas, all of your different races, come together as one planet and one people? We have dedicated millennia upon millennia to this idea. The earlier experiments with Pan and Lemuria and Atlantis were not successful. But this one will be.
Now the interviewer asks the woman to exchange spirits and to channel another spirit that calls itself the Tibetan. Tibet is an often referred to hotspot for New Age empowerment. Hitler's Nazi occultists went to Tibet thinking to find their ancient Aryan ancestors. Listen carefully to the Tibetan's message as he refers to the great I Am, the name God reveals in the Bible to describe himself.
I am the Tibetan, and I have come during this time continuum to discuss with you the idea of the only question in the universe. And that question is, what is? And the answer is, I am. For all things that are created, that were created, that shall be created, fall under the question, what is? And you, each and every one of you, are that answer, and that answer is, I am. I am is also the name of the creator of this universe. That is all. I relinquish control to the entity, Leah.
As the entity Leah returns, she confirms the You Are God message and refers to the new race that will arise through the New Age movement. Most New Agers today do not realize that this new race is identical to the master race prophesied by Adolf Hitler, a race of so-called supermen who will be their own gods, having rejected the one true God of the Bible.
This new age is where there will be a race on this planet and throughout all galaxies. And the name of that race will be peace. It's been wonderful spending some time with you. As you take this little piece of information with you, know that you are never alone. You are all connected to the creative source of this universe. And nothing can stop that flow except your denial that you are God. We thank you. Good day.
This man channels a spirit calling itself Bashar, who seems to hold his audience spellbound as he tells them they are equal to the creator of the universe.
That you are all made in the image of the infinite creator, and what that means is you are all infinite creators. We thank you.
Jack Purcell has become one of the more popular channels, possessed by a spirit named Lazarus.
All right, fine. Well, indeed, a pleasure to be talking with you, and, well, shall we begin where you'd like to begin?
Lazarus tells the listener that God is already within man, and that if man wants to find God, he needs only to find himself.
Now, the problem here is people look out there, yes? They're looking all over the place, as though God was somehow outside of them. It's within. Every spiritual reference, be it fundamental or be it avant-garde, speaks of that spirit within. And we would suggest here that it's there. And therefore your task in this physical lifetime really isn't to find God, because God's everywhere. God is all that is everything. It's all over the place. Your task in any physical incarnation is to find yourself.
Jane Roberts was a New Age pioneer who channeled a spirit known as Seth. Roberts sold more than 1 million copies of her books and inspired many. In this vocal recording, we hear her channel the spirit of Seth.
I've said this many times. I say it 1,000,000 times. Here in this class and in my books. You form your reality. Then what is the you that forms this spectacular reality that you know? When will you be willing to admit the greatness that is within each of you and not cower, and not say in this realm of reality it is not possible, but encounter the greatness within yourselves.
Clearly the main message that Seth is trying to say is that people are gods in training.
Some may find it interesting that the name Seth is synonymous with the Egyptian god Set, and in the realm of the occult, Set is one of the infernal names of Satan. Actress Shirley MacLaine was Time magazine's poster girl for the New Age movement in the 1980s. MacLaine starred in the biographical miniseries Out on a Limb, based on her journey into New Age belief. The series has been called the most talked about miniseries of all time. The title, Out on a Limb, refers to the risk involved in seeking the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
Mayan told me to tell you one thing if you had a hard time with this. She said in order to get to the fruit of the tree, you have to go out on a limb.
Mayan is a spirit guide sending a message to MacLaine, a message that is repeated throughout the series. In the book of Isaiah, God says, "And when they shall say unto you, Seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God? For the living should they seek unto the dead? To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them." In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul warned the church when he wrote, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy." It would seem the seducing spirits of the 18th and 19th centuries focused first on creating a new mentality in the minds of men concerning the traditional interpretation of the Bible. But as the movement progressed, the attack would reach to the very heart of God's authority. When Spiritist prophet Andrew Jackson Davis channeled his book on the principles of nature, he claimed to be a voice to mankind, to set forth the divine revelations of nature itself. He declared that in the beginning, the universalum was one boundless, undefinable, and unimaginable ocean of liquid fire, and that through an evolving process, all things proceeded from this principle of power. Like Mary Baker Eddy, Davis taught that God was not a person who created things according to his will, but rather was a principle or force that could be tapped into. Describing the laws of man and nature, he said, "Would it not be best to have the world exist on these immutable laws? Then existence would be emblematical of the brightness and beauty of Eden. Then the great tree which has so long been concealed from the mental view would grow and progress in glory, beauty, and perfection. Its branches would wave over the world. Such would be the delicious fruits of the great tree of knowledge." Rather than recognize the tree of knowledge as a curse upon mankind, Davis sought to embrace it. And rather than allow God's Word to define how we understand nature, Davis suggested that man's understanding of nature should govern his comprehension of God. Davis wrote, "It is the office of paleontological sciences to set forth general truths in the departments of astronomy, geology, anatomy, physiology, etc., all as in perfect harmony with each other. In this, true theology has its foundation, and the teachings of this should constitute the only study of the theologian. As such, it is compelling that men of science would become the oracles for the next stage in the New Thought process." In 1859, Charles Darwin published The Origin of the Species. Most students today, while familiar with Darwin, are unaware of the full title of his work, which is The Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. In this work, Darwin challenged the origin of animal life on the planet and formalized the evolutionary ideas that had been pondered for centuries. In 1871, Darwin published The Descent of Man, in which he applied this thinking to the origin of mankind itself. More than a century later, Charles Darwin is revered as a prophetic voice for humanism in the scientific community. His theories on evolution are today regarded as scientific fact. The very authorship of life itself, once acknowledged as from a divine creator who made man in his own image, has now been attributed to chance and the coincidence of nature. Yet some researchers argue that Darwin's theory has no foundation in real science, but is rather based on the ancient mystery teachings of the occult.
First, I would say the evolution theory did not start with Charles Darwin. It started way before that. It actually started in the Garden of Eden with Satan, when he said to Eve in Genesis chapter 3, "Eve, if you eat off that tree, ye shall be as gods." The whole idea that man can progress and evolve and become better, is an idea that came from the devil in the Garden of Eden. Satan started that. And then down through history, there have been who knows how many thousands of folks that have promoted that idea or pushed it. Aristotle taught a form of evolution. Plato taught a type of evolution. The Babylonians, down through history, there's always been folks who taught, that the Egyptians taught we evolved from slime along the Nile River. So Darwin simply made the theory popular. That's all he did. He didn't really invent the theory of evolution. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, wrote a whole book called Zoonomia, where he basically laid out everything Darwin said. And Darwin, his grandson, then stole all of his ideas and never gave credit to Grandpa one time. Interesting plagiarism back then. But Darwin's theory, as we call it Darwin's theory, but actually it was way before him. The evolution theory would say that everything is evolving and getting better, and we don't see any of that. We don't see any mutations produce any improvement to the gene pool. Mutation is a scrambling of information that results in a genetic loss. Nobody's ever proven a good mutation. Some people say, well, bacteria become resistant to drugs. I say, well, yeah, that's because they lost information. The antibiotic can't lock onto the ribosome. So it's like somebody's coming through town and they're handcuffing everybody, hauling them off to jail, going to kill them. But you don't have any arms, so they can't handcuff you. You say, wow, that's beneficial. Well, it might be beneficial for the moment, but it's not beneficial in the long term, okay? So these bacteria that are deformed, that have lost information, now are able to be resistant to the drugs only for that particular drug, and only for a short time. When you put them back in the regular population, they're worse off. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to back up the evolution theory. Nobody's ever seen a dog come from a non-dog, and we certainly have never seen a dog come from a rock, which is what the evolution theory teaches if you go back, millions of years. Most evolutionists don't even know their own theory. They don't even know that they believe they came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago.
A typical modern science textbook says that 18 to 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated into one very dense, very hot region that may have been much smaller than a period on this page. For some unknown reason, this region exploded. This explosion is called the Big Bang. Coming out of this Big Bang, a giant rock somehow appeared that was rained on by cosmic rains from millions of years. Evolutionary scientists teach that from this rock supposedly came all the life on planet Earth.
So the evolution theory teaches, 20 billion years ago or sometime in the past, pick a number, nothing exploded and made everything. And then all this stuff was spreading out through space from the Big Bang theory, and then slowly groups of this matter began to get together and condense into planets and stars and moons and stuff like that. And then slowly, very slowly, over billions of years, or quickly if you're from Harvard, one of those planets, Earth, started to develop life, just by chance, of course. Took a long time. And then that first life form that slowly evolved out of the soup in the ocean learned how to reproduce itself, which is a pretty good trick, of course. And then slowly it turned into different kinds of animals. So elephants and bananas and humans have a common ancestor by the evolution theory. That is pure speculation. It's religious. They believe that. I don't care what they believe, but it's not science.
Darwinian scientists have attempted to explain the process of evolution as a gradual development that takes place over millions of years. Yet some scientists argue that for the building blocks of life, this is simply impossible. Darwin himself admitted that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Through the 20th century, the complexity of living organisms has revealed itself to be far greater than Darwin ever imagined. At the White House Millennium Council for the year 2000, world-renowned scientist Stephen Hawking commented that our present computers are less complex than the brain of an earthworm, a species not noted for their intellectual powers. Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling taught that a single cell, the smallest living unit, is more complicated than New York City. In his book, Darwin's Black Box, author and biochemist Michael J. Behe argues that the complexity of cell structure overthrows the idea of a gradual evolution. His conclusions reveal that highly sophisticated molecular machines control every cellular process. Thus, the details of life are finely calibrated, and the machinery of life enormously complex. The simplest self-sufficient cell has the capacity to produce thousands of different proteins and other molecules. Synthesis, degradation, energy generation, replication, maintenance of cell architecture, mobility, regulation, repair, communication, all of these functions take place in virtually every cell, and each function itself requires the interaction of numerous parts. A child can die because of a single defect in one of the many machines needed for taking proteins to the lysosome. A single flaw in the cell's protein transport pathway is fatal. Unless the entire system were immediately in place, our ancestors would have died. He concludes that attempts at a gradual evolution are a recipe for extinction. Behe further rebukes the scientific community for ignoring the evidence. He says the impotence of Darwinian theory in accounting for the molecular basis of life is evident from the complete absence in the professional scientific literature of any detailed models by which complex biochemical systems could have been produced. In the 20th century, other noteworthy scientists have agreed. World-renowned astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle rejected Darwin's theory. It was Hoyle who coined the phrase, the Big Bang. He was, in fact, mocking the idea that all things came about through some great explosion billions of years ago. Hoyle calculated that the odds of producing just the basic enzymes of life by chance are 1 in 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. Hoyle claims that believing the first cell originated by chance is like believing a tornado could sweep through a junkyard filled with airplane parts and form a Boeing 747. He said, the scientific world has been bamboozled into believing that evolution has been proved. Nothing could be further from the truth. Hoyle said this situation is well known to geneticists, and yet nobody seems to blow the whistle decisively on the theory. Most scientists still cling to Darwinism because of its grip on the educational system. You either have to believe the concepts or be branded a heretic. Australian biologist Michael Denton, author of the book Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, says science has so thoroughly discredited Darwinian evolution that it should be discarded. Meanwhile, mathematics professor Wolfgang Smith says evolution is a metaphysical myth, totally bereft of scientific sanction. At the British Museum of Natural History in London, paleontologist Colin Patterson started asking other scientists to tell him one thing they knew about evolution. Lecturing to biologists at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, he said, I tried that question on the geology staff at the Field Museum of Natural History, and the only answer I got was silence. I tried it on the members of the Evolutionary Morphology Seminar in the University of Chicago, a very prestigious body of evolutionists, and all I got there was silence for a long time, and eventually one person said, "I do know one thing, it ought not to be taught in high school." In spite of the evidence, Patterson did not abandon evolution. He says, "Then I woke up and realized that all my life I had been duped into taking evolutionism as revealed truth in some way." He said he had experienced a shift from evolution as knowledge to evolution as faith. What Patterson described was his own paradigm shift from scientist to Darwinian worshiper. His idol, the cathedral of evolutionary thought. This trend among scientists has been acknowledged by others in the scientific community.
The building behind me is London's Natural History Museum. It looks rather like a cathedral or a church, and in a way that's what it is. It's a kind of temple to Darwin's theory of evolution. People come to museums like the Natural History Museum to get answers to their question. Have we evolved from apes? Do humans and apes share a common ancestor? And to look at an exhibit like this, you'd think that question had been answered decisively yes. But the answer is far from decisive. In fact, this representation is an interpretation of the fossils, the interpretation of one group of scientists. There are other interpretations, but you won't find them in this museum or any other museum in the world.
In the days of early America, the Founding Fathers held few doubts that man had been created rather than evolved. The Declaration of Independence says plainly, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." The Founding Fathers maintained that the rights and liberties of men were defended by the authority of God, who created them. But if mankind merely evolved, then a man's rights are established only by man's opinion. As that opinion changes, the rights of men can also change, as was the case in Nazi Germany.
Hitler believed that evolution was true and the inferior races need to be eliminated, and he had a list.
Hitler's opinion was that Jews and people considered genetically inferior should be eliminated from society. The Nazis relied upon the Darwinian view of the natural selection of favored races to further their own ideas on the struggle for life. In fact, Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, means my struggle, a struggle the Nazis clearly defined as demonstrated by this propaganda film. In the opening scene, the narrator makes direct reference to Darwin's teaching on natural selection.
Alles Lebensschwache geht in der Natur unfehlbar zugrunde. Wir Menschen haben gegen dieses Gesetz der natürlichen Auslese in den letzten Jahrzehnten furchtbar gesündigt. Wir haben unwertes Leben nicht nur erhalten, wir haben ihm auch Vermehrung gewährt. Die Nachkommen dieser Kranken sahen so aus. Erbgesunde Menschen wohnten in engen, lichtlosen Gassen und halb verfallenen Lauben. Idioten und Schwachsinnigen baute man aber Paläste, und diese kranken Menschen waren gar nicht empfänglich für die Schönheit, mit der man sie umgab. Das deutsche Volk kennt das ganze Ausmaß dieses Elends wohl kaum. Es kennt nicht den drückenden Geist jener Häuser, in denen Tausende lallende Schwachsinnige künstlich ernährt und gepflegt werden müssen, die tiefer stehen als jedes Tier. In den letzten 70 Jahren hat sich unser Volk um 50% vermehrt, während die Zahl der Erbkranken im gleichen Zeitraum um 450% gestiegen ist. Wenn diese Entwicklung so weiterliefe, würde schon in 50 Jahren auf 4 gesunde Menschen ein Erbkranker kommen. Ein endloser Zug des Grauens würde in die Nation hineinmarschieren. Maßloses Elend über ein wertvolles Volk kommen, das dann mit Riesenschritten seinem Ende entgegenginge.
Die jüdische Bevölkerung Baltis wird in Sammellager gebracht.
Das sind jene Ostjudentypen, die besonders nach dem Weltkriege die Großstädte Mittel- und Westeuropas überschwemmten, wo sie als Parasiten ihre Gastvölker zersetzten und tausendjährige Kulturen zu vernichten drohten.
Under evolutionary influence, Hitler declared, "I have the right to exterminate millions of individuals of inferior races which multiply like vermin." While Germany had been a democratic society, the Nazis evolved German law and changed it to suit their own wicked desires. In the Bible, God says, "I am the Lord, I change not." Jesus said, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." It is for this reason that the principles and teachings of the Bible were considered so important by early Americans. Sir William Blackstone maintained that man-made laws should not be allowed to contradict the laws of God. And if man's laws did contradict God's laws, Blackstone stated they were not valid. In Acts 5:29, the apostles taught, we ought to obey God rather than men. In the Bible, God reveals that because man was made in God's image, he holds a particular place above every creature on earth. Man is not equal to the beasts of the field, but he would be if all life evolved from a common source. If that were the case, killing a man would be no different than killing an insect, or a cow, or a carrot. In 1912, British scientist Charles Dawson made the Piltdown Man discovery and changed the world. Piltdown Man was considered the missing link, supposedly the skull and jawbone of a half-man, half-ape mutation. It convinced millions that Darwin's theory was scientifically proved. But in 1953, some 40 years later, Piltdown was declared a hoax.
It was somebody taking a human skull and an ape's jawbone. They broke off the joint where they would fit together so they couldn't tell, then filed them down, made them look really old, and buried them in a gravel pit. It was a hoax, a deliberate, either a joke, which they never told anybody about for 40 years, or a lie to try to prove the evolution theory.
In either case, it may be said that no other discovery in the 20th century has had as great an impact on furthering evolution than Piltdown. Stephen Jay Gould writes that Piltdown absorbed the professional attention of many fine scientists. It led millions of people astray for 40 years. Researcher Richard Harder reports that more than 500 articles and memoirs were written on the Piltdown finds before the hoax was exposed. Likewise, articles in encyclopedias and sections in textbooks and popular books of science, an immense amount of derivative work. For many years, the Piltdown finds were a significant percentage of the fossils which were used to reconstruct human ancestry. In his book, The Piltdown Forgery, J.S. Weiner remarks that this ill-begotten form of primitive man received nearly as much attention as all the legitimate specimens in the fossil record put together. Yet once the hoax was exposed, the scientific community failed to repent of its error. The damage had already been done, and a generation of evolutionary thought had been born. Dawson himself never lived to be exposed. He died shortly after his famous discovery in 1916. While controversy over the hoax continues, today the BBC refers to Dawson as the Piltdown Faker. They write that of his discoveries, at least 38 are fakes. The only suspect in these frauds is Charles Dawson himself, the same man who uncovered the remains of Eanthropus dawsoni, the Piltdown Man. BBC concludes that for Charles Dawson, Piltdown was not a one-off hoax, more the culmination of a life's work. Yet Dawson did not act alone. His partner in the Piltdown affair was a young paleontologist and Roman Catholic Jesuit priest named Pierre Teilhard du Chardin.
I tend to believe a Catholic priest named Pierre de Chardin was involved in this also, and he really pushed evolution on the Catholic Church. because he said, oh, we got proof, we got this half man, half monkey.
After Dawson's death, Teilhard would become heir to the find of the century, and may be the man most responsible for the normalization of evolutionary thinking in Western culture today. Teilhard would go on to work in China and take part in the now famous Peking Man discovery, a collection of would-be missing links that mysteriously disappeared in 1941 before anyone could fully examine them. Of 175 fossil fragments recorded, all were supposedly lost. Only the notes and photographs taken by Teilhard and his team of scientists remain. Modern critics question the integrity of the find because of Teilhard's association with Charles Dawson, the Piltdown faker. But Teilhard's scientific deceptions are minor when compared to the theological abyss that he sought to drag himself and humanity into. He wrote, "Is evolution a theory, a system, or a hypothesis? It is much more. It is the general condition to which all theories, all hypotheses, all systems must bow, and which they must satisfy henceforward if they are to be thinkable and true. Evolution is a light illuminating all facts, a curve that all lines must follow." Treated as an apostate by the Vatican, banned from teaching, and forbidden to publish his writings, Teilhard became the hero of sophisticated Protestants and then returned to the good graces of Rome 26 years after his death. The Catholic Church, that once rejected evolutionary thinking, seems to have been among those who bowed to its hypothesis, largely due to the influence of Teilhard, who had become a hero and role model for a whole generation of younger priests and theologians. He set the stage for the renewal movements which finally came to flower in the era of Vatican II. Vatican II is the Catholic document that launched the ecumenical movement for the purpose of ultimately unifying mankind in a universal faith. Evolution plays a key role in ecumenism since the pagan religions of the world are largely based on its precepts. Under Pope John Paul II, Rome now considers evolution to be a part of the gospel truth. It is reported that the Pope has put the teaching authority of the Roman Catholic Church firmly behind the view that the human body is the product of a gradual process of evolution. But the influence of this Jesuit priest would reach far beyond the walls of Rome. In 1985, author Marilyn Ferguson published her controversial book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, which USA Today called the Handbook of the New Age. In it, Ferguson describes a worldwide conspiracy of people seeking to bring about a paradigm shift in global consciousness. In the Los Angeles Times, Marilyn Ferguson revealed that Teilhard was the name most frequently mentioned by 185 leaders in the New Age movement when Ferguson asked who was the most influential person in their lives. By the end of the 20th century, Teilhard du Chardin would be known by many as the father of the New Age. Teilhard died in 1955, but his passing only marked the beginning of his meteoric rise to fame. His treatises, long suppressed, were published and quickly translated into all major languages. Harvard's Widener Library now houses an entire tier of books devoted to Teilhard's writing and thinking. Today, more and more people, Christians as well as non-Christians, accept his views and take keen interest in studying his philosophy. He has become known for his theory that man is evolving mentally and socially toward a final spiritual unity. Andrew Jackson Davis, known by some as the prophet of the New Revelation, channeled a message from the spirit realm that called for the paleontological sciences to direct man's perception of God through the study of nature. Is it merely coincidence that Teilhard du Chardin, a priest and paleontologist, would lead the way into the dawn of a new age? Researcher Charles P. Henderson writes, this paleontologist and Jesuit priest made it his personal mission to reconstruct the most basic Christian doctrines from the perspectives of science. He would do this by overthrowing all the barriers that had been erected between science and religion. He would take the lessons learned from the study of nature as the foundation on which to reconstruct the Christian faith. After the similar examples of Swedenborg, Phineas Quimby, and Mary Baker Eddy, Teilhard sought to deny the reality of sin and openly rejected the biblical gospel. In 1947, Teilhard said, "Very definitely, there was no Adam and no Eve and no original sin." He wrote that original sin continually obstructs the natural expansion of our religion. It is a straitjacket that checks any movement of heart or head. It binds us hand and foot and drains the blood from us because it represents a survival of static concepts that are an anachronism in our evolutionist system of thought. A Catholic newsletter says that in the theology of Teilhard, we are all becoming Christ. There is no original sin and therefore no need of redemption. Evolutionary forces are ferrying everyone along to godhood, and all are anonymous Christians making faith in the literal death and resurrection of Christ unnecessary. The American Atheist magazine understands the situation too well. It writes, "Destroy Adam and Eve and original sin, and in the rubble you will find the sorry remains of the Son of God, and take away the meaning of his death." But did Teilhard intend to undermine the Christ of the Bible? Some have thought so, since Teilhard's evolutionary teachings parallel Eastern mysticism and pagan theology.
The whole Eastern pagan theological worldview is to undermine the deity of Christ and to elevate the deity of humanity. So Eastern mysticism, paganism, is talking about the God within. The way they Christianize it is by saying Christ is within me. I am the Christ, or the Antichrist that's going to come is the Christ, or the Lord, the Maitreya.
The official birthday of the society came 4 years later in 1875, with a formal declaration from Henry S. Alcott, the president and co-founder of the organization. Blavatsky's House of Theosophy would formalize what began as the New Thought movement into a religious system that would dramatically change the Western view of God and his relationship to mankind. While early America recognized the gospel of Jesus Christ as the only path to salvation, theosophical teachings argued for the essential oneness of all religions and the omnipresence of divine spirit. Theosophy declares that it was formed upon the basis of a universal brotherhood of humanity. Yet Blavatsky would teach far more than a universal brotherhood. She would take the New Thought movement to the next dimension, fully exposing the source of its power in her voluminous writings.
These volumes were channeled to her, and they're very, very complex, they're very erudite, but if you read them you'll find out that she has rejected the God of the Bible and embraced Lucifer. And she's quite open about that.
She did emphasize Satan as being the true God, and Satan beckoning Adam and Eve to partake of the fruit. He was really turning them on to true godhood, and he's the one who really freed the human race in Blavatsky's teaching.
According to Blavatsky, Satan was in fact God, while Jehovah, the God of the Bible, was the real devil and enemy of mankind. Blavatsky wrote that the appellation Satan belongs by right to the first and cruelest adversary of all other gods, Jehovah, not to the serpent which spoke only words of sympathy and wisdom. Elsewhere she writes that Satan, the serpent of Genesis, is the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind, for it is he who opened the eyes of the automaton Adam, created by Jehovah. In the secret doctrine, she says, in antiquity and reality, Lucifer or Luciferus is the name of the angelic entity presiding over the light of truth as over the light of the day. Lucifer is divine and terrestrial light, the Holy Ghost and Satan at one and the same time. And now it stands proven, she says, that Satan, or the red fiery dragon, the lord of phosphorus, and Lucifer, or light-bearer, is in us. It is our mind, our tempter and redeemer, our intelligent liberator, and savior from pure animalism.
It were demons that channeled her writings to her, and of course she wrote about world government, the importance of world government, and the idea that mankind, at least Western civilization, began with the Aryan, and the Aryan came out of Tibet. And of course, if you've ever read anything about Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, why they actually sent expeditions to Tibet looking for the origins of Aryan man. And there were strong ties between the SS and this whole idea of this Superman that they were trying to create and the writings of Madame Blavatsky. The entire basis of the Nazi movement was founded on theosophy and her writings, and of course the symbol that she used, the swastika, is what Adolf Hitler used as the symbol of the Nazi movement. But the average individual does not understand the relationships between Madame Blavatsky's writing and her worship of Lucifer and her accessing the other dimensions and what happened in Germany under Adolf Hitler.
Time magazine did a whole thing on the New Age movement with with crystals and, talking about all the different New Age phenomena that became very popular in the 80s and is still with us to this day. And Shirley MacLaine was on the front cover holding the crystals. And in that piece, they talked about, in the introduction to that piece at the beginning of the magazine, they talked about how we don't know where the term New Age came from or where it's going. Well, the Bible tells us, Jesus said in the last days there would be this false, this religious movement, which would be saying the time draws near, which would be predicting a new age, and which would have its basis in satanic or false miracles, which is what the New Age movement's all about. So we know where it's going.
In 1904, a man named Aleister Crowley channeled a spirit who inspired a series of writings known as the Book of the Law. According to the introduction of the work, the book was dictated in Cairo, Egypt, between noon and 1 p.m. on 3 successive days. The author, a demonic spirit, called himself Aiwas and claimed to be a messenger from the forces ruling this earth at present. This description is quite revealing, since Jesus referred to Satan as the prince or ruler of this world. Satan is also called the god of this world by the Apostle Paul. In this Book of the Law, Crowley set down the chief principle for what he called the new eon. He wrote, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt." This declaration is in contrast to the example of Christ in the Bible. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed, "Father, not as I will, but as thou wilt," in obedience to God. But in the Book of the Law, Crowley turns the tables and teaches men not as God wills, but rather, "Do what thou wilt." This promotion of self-will that so often leads to self-empowerment is perhaps the climax of man's desire to be his own God, to rule over himself rather than live in obedience to the God who created him. Jesus said, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it." Having thoroughly rejected the gospel of Jesus Christ, Aleister Crowley would earn the title of the wickedest man in the world by the London newspapers. The British media exposed his bizarre satanic rituals at the mysterious Abbey Thelema in Sicily. On one occasion, a man named Raoul Loveday died from drinking poisoned cat's blood at Crowley's command. Loveday's widow returned to London and exposed Crowley's wicked behavior to the world. When he was a child, Crowley's own mother referred to him as the Beast. According to Crowley researcher James W. Revac, he quickly identified with the title, and for the rest of his life, he viewed himself as the Beast of the Apocalypse, the enemy of Christianity. Like all New Age adherents, past and present, Crowley revered the serpent's lie from the Garden of Eden. He wrote, "This serpent, Satan, is not the enemy of man, but he who made gods of our race, knowing good and evil. He bade know thyself and taught initiation. Through the 20th century, the influence of this black magician and professing Satanist upon popular culture has compelled some researchers to consider him the real father of the modern New Age movement.
Well, he's basically not only the father of modern Satanism and the most highly regarded Satanist of the last century, he is also the father of the modern New Age movement, which is extensive around the Western world today. I won't say he single-handedly ushered in the New Age movement, but he, more so than any other human being, was instrumental in the popularization of the New Age movement. Altered states of consciousness, trying to make altered states of consciousness scientific, through whether it be hallucinogens and seeing reality different, and using the comparisons of a microscope and a looking into a different reality on a spiritual level, whether it was drugs, whether it was astrology or the practice of ritual magic, whether it was sex magic, whether it was his ideas of world unity through magic and so forth. All these are very popular through the 1960s and after that in ushering in what today is called the New Age movement. But he was very, very powerful as far as, I mean, more so than anybody. Satanists will admit that Aleister Crowley was, the Satanist of the 20th century. Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan, which was more notorious than Aleister Crowley's group, was simply pop Satanism to many serious Satanists.
Hail Satan!
Hail Satan!
Shem Parash!
Shem Parash!
Hail Satan!
Hail Satan!
And even Anton LaVey's group, I mean, Anton LaVey's library was chock full of Aleister Crowley's books. The co-founder of the Church of Satan with Anton LaVey, Kenneth Anger, was an avowed Satanist who was a follower of Aleister Crowley. And many of his works, Invocation to My Demon Brother, Lucifer Rising, and so forth, videos that he made in the late 60s extolling Satanism, were all about Aleister Crowley, unveiling a picture of Crowley and that's worshipped and so forth. So